it started off as like this idea that I had and I wanted to share. And I think it kind of showed how I thought. And I kind of introduced this kind of way of thinking, this alternate way of thinking. And that's kind of like the name I made for myself. But I kind of like put my stamp of like, I'm thinking differently. I'm thinking differently about this case. I'm going to think differently about everything else. Let's go. And I think people, and I was still like, I'm still in my infancy with thinking like this. I'm only like a year into it, you know, so it's still new to me. And then people would send me information about things that they found really interesting. And I would look at it through my lens and we would like share back and forth. And I learned so much about different cases and also about like philosophy. I feel like I went through a crash course in philosophy, through a crash course in literature, filmmaking, all these different art. People would send me just every concept, all like Renaissance idea of what makes, what like creates our world and this rich colors of our world. People were sending me information on, and one of those things was visualizations and color, and people were starting to send me all this information on how color works. And because I was exploring at the time with John Bonet, I was exploring like the the digitizing of light and color and how that works in the 3D world of 3D realm. And then people started sending me like more on color theory and the philosophy of color and what color does as far as like power and energy and wavelengths and chakras. And I was not really there. I was not really into all of that kind of more esoteric approaches and philosophical approaches and energetic approaches to color. And so I was kind of like getting all this information from like just people on Twitter. And I had a second epiphany in, I would say my first epiphany was John Bonet. That was like a eureka moment for me. I really think that was like sparked like a divine spark in myself. I felt something. I had this true like lightning bolt almost outside of myself, definitely outside of myself. And all of a sudden, like this whole idea was in my brain. And then that happened again in June of this year, last year of 2020, June of 2020. I had this realization during it was actually during the George Floyd event where there were riots in the street all the time. Like the whole world looked like it was burning down. In Minneapolis, there was a specific riot happening, and I kept seeing this guy in a pink t-shirt. It was like the pink pizza box man. He was carrying this pizza box everywhere, and he was outside of the auto zone, and he was wearing a pink t-shirt. And I just kept seeing this color pink, this very specific color pink. And it kept reminding me of the color that Jackie was wearing of her suit. It was the very specific shade of magenta. That's really the only way to describe it, is a magenta pink, not just light pink, not rose pink, not hot pink, but it's a magenta. And I had just learned that the color magenta doesn't exist. I had just learned that. I had learned that what makes the color magenta so interesting, this very specific shade of pink, is that it's a complete optical illusion. And I learned that about that specific color, but then I also learned about this spectrum of colors called the line of purples. And magenta is at the dead center of the line of purples. Magenta is actually a shade of purple. It's pink, but pink is a shade of purple. And so what I learned about this color theory concept of the line of purples was that it encapsulates like the whole spectrum from red to blue, red to violet. And violet is a shade of blue. We don't often think about that. We think of violet as purple, but violet is a shade of blue. Roses are red, violets are blue. So we learned that in school, but we don't really apply it. We kind of always think violet is purple. And so when you think about our rainbow, our visible light spectrum, Roy G. Biv, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. Red and violet are on opposite sides. So red and deep blue are on opposite sides of the color spectrum. Red and blue for politics, and we'll get into that in a second. But so they don't meet. They're at the opposite side. They're really not supposed to be conjoined. They're not supposed to be anywhere near each other. But in 3D space, when our 2D visible light spectrum that's flat in a rainbow, when that gets projected into 3D space, something really incredible happens where it creates another dimension out of this 2D space. And what happens is the 2D rainbow kind of collapses in on itself, folds around on itself, where the opposite ends of violet and red, they come together, and they're not really supposed to. They're not supposed to be together. And when you think about magnetism, it's often represented in polarity of red and blue. And you think about like a magnet, the color of magnetism is red and blue. And when you put the magnet, when you put the polarity magnets together and you kind of try to put them together, you can actually feel the energy force. You can feel a force that is created when you're trying to put magnets together. And the stronger the magnet, the stronger that resistive force will be. But there's like an energy field that is created. It doesn't exist when the magnets are far apart. Like, well, you can't sense it. It does exist. Everything, the energy exists all around us. But when you put them together, you really can like physically feel it. And that physical energetic force field, that is also occurring when you put the polar opposite ends of red and violet together. And in that energetic force field, something happens. And we're talking about colors. We're not talking about magnetism now. We're talking about colors. And so the force field that's created in between, it's not just this magnetic force, it's this color force that's created. And when you mix red and blue, you get purple. And so when you think about what purple is, it's the blending of that red and blue together. And that whole experience of creating purple is happening in this zone where the red and blue are trying to meet together. Like they're trying to wrap around, they're trying to meet, but they can't quite do it, just like magnets can't quite get together. And so they have to create this like field. And that's purple. What we understand as the color purple is actually it's an illusion. It's a created space, and our brain does not know what to do with it. And so our brain kind of it reads this energy field as a spectrum of purples. And so we're not seeing the color purple in real life through our eyes. We're actually experiencing the color purple in our brain, because our brain is just reading this straight up energy. And when you think about colors, purple is it's the most energetic color. And it's extremely powerful because it's not just a flat wavelength of there is no purple wavelength. There is no magenta wavelength. There is no true wavelength of these colors. These are energy fields. We're experiencing energy fields when we see pink and when we see purple, when we see all these shades ranging from like a really reddish purple to the middle of magenta, all the way to the other side, which is like a bluish purple. All of these colors in between, like they're forms of energy. And so I was understanding this, and I saw the pink pizza box guy, and I connected that back with, Jackie's dress, and I looked back at the John Bonet case, and she was all magenta, and it's not just pink, it's this very specific color. And I just had this revelation that, if magenta is at the dead center of this line of purples, and the line of purples represents illusion, and magenta is an illusion, it would stand that the truth of these colors is illusion. So if you see these colors, what these colors are representing are illusions. It's signaling inherent illusion, because that's what they mean. That's what they are. If you see pink, pink is an illusion. I started to come up with this theory that these colors were being inserted, that these colors were being used specifically to indicate to the viewer that there was some sort of illusion at play, without having to tell us, they could lie to us in their words, and they could lie to us in all the other actions, and they could lie to us in the scenarios and the scenes and all the different ways that we understand and communicate, visually, symbolically. So all these different truths are happening. We're seeing all these events. We're seeing all these reading these words. We're seeing these headlines. We're seeing these pictures. But embedded in those sometimes are specific colors. And I know, with like right now with the coronavirus, if you turn on CNN and if they're talking about coronavirus, it's a 99% likelihood that their screen is going to be all purple. There's some correlation that's quite measurable and quite obvious. There's a correlation between the coronavirus and the color purple when it's being reported. I've noticed it in abundance. People are they have been sending people are tagging me all the time on new, it's getting more and more purple, it seems. It's almost like they can't report on this disease, this deadly global contagion, without inserting the color purple into the visual messaging, which I think is really interesting, because I believe that the kernel of this, the kernel root, the little nebulous, the center of this is deception. I believe that there's a deception that we're being introduced to with this disease. And then the fact that it is like surrounding itself in this color, these purples that represent illusion, that are illusions themselves, optical illusions, manipulations of light. And that's, I think, the important part to note is it's a manipulation of light that is creating the purples. And so when you think about manipulation of light, light is information. And so you think about manipulation of light, purple, manipulation of information is truth, deceptive headlines, deceptive stories. It kind of goes together. And I think, you know, that's how I have approached it, and that's how I'm looking into it. And, you know, I gotta say, I could be wrong about all of this stuff, but I'm not ready to back away from it, because it continues to reinforce itself. It continues to reinforce itself to me. And there are times when I go, okay, no more purples. I'm not going to talk about it anymore. I'm never going to say the word purple again. I'm moving on. I'm going to get a new eureka moment, and we're going to get to the bottom of the O.J. Simpson case. You know, we're going to do something new. It's time to do something different. And then I will wake up in the morning and I'll look on whatever, CNN, or I'll look on New York Times, or I'll look on whatever, and it'll be just full purple with like a really, really scary headline, or a ridiculous headline that, you know, is just fear-based, like a loose trap. Like I like to say, these stories are sometimes they're like clickbait, but they're clickbait in a way that they know that you're going to read it and be fearful or upset or disgusted or angry or whatever, you know, and they're just covered in purple. And
so
I go,
purple is like a nod
yeah,
to their own, like, hey, you don't actually need to be scared about this. This is just more about scaring the normies, the poors.
yeah. I think that's an excellent question, and I think it's that, but I think it goes a little bit more to this understanding of like a universal karmic debt in a way. I think that the deception is so pervasive, because they do tell us the truth too, as well. Like, I think they're allowed to deceive us, because ultimately they do put the truth right there plainly for us to see.
Oh, right. Like that Roman maxim, I don't know what the Latin words are, but it basically means like, he who would be deceived, let him.
Yes, and that's also biblical. That's also pretty big. I'm not super knowledgeable on the Bible, but I'm realizing that there are so many like connected keys within there, and I'm trying to learn more from a biblical perspective, like what these things. But there is a similar Bible concept of if you are willingly asleep, that's your own fault. Like if you are incapable of stepping outside your own understanding and your understanding, or your deception, you're to be deceived. And you know, and I think that is something that we all kind of face. I was asleep for my entire life. I'm new to this. I'm as new to this as, you know, I feel like I'm still learning so much I'm still forming my own opinions on what is authentic and what is important and what is real and unreal, you know, even though I seem to be pretty hard line on what's unreal sometimes. But I'm still learning. And I think that the purples are a way for us to see the truth, a way for us, if we can learn to speak the language of the universe, if we can learn to see these patterns and be aware of the patterns that do exist, that surround us all the time, because the purples aren't new. When you become aware of them, they seem like they're in abundance, but they're not new. I think they've been around for a long time.
Right.
Even through history with royalty and stuff, you know. Purple's a historical, and biblically, purple's a really a lot of the, there's in Revelations, actually there's a whole thing about wearing scarlet robes and Revelations, which is like, I kind of think we're living through Revelation times right now, where we're seeing it's an interesting time to be awake and aware. And I think we have a vantage point that is so different than our forefathers. We have the benefit of understanding the technology way more. We have a benefit of having, we're interconnected in a way through the internet and through just how our society works. We're more connected with people that are outside of our bubbles. Talk about being in a bubble. I think that's a big part of it, because if you're in that bubble, you just don't know what you don't know. You know, we just don't know that. We don't even think to ask certain questions. You know, like with the John Benet Ramsey case, this is the last thing I'll say about it, but like nobody ever thought to question the pageants. Why would we think to question the pageants? They were such a big part of the case. Why would we question them? But it's one of those blinding details. It's one of the, so I think sometimes we are given these stories with these really blinding details that are so cemented and so strong and so like seemingly unmovable. But I think it's up to us to take kind of everything that we've been, all the constructs of life, all the systems that we've been told are immovable, our financial systems, our educational systems, our healthcare system, which is, you know, our education system public education does not yield an educated public. Our healthcare system does not yield a healthy, robust society. There's
no profiting cures.
Right. There's no reason for us to do anything preventative. And I think that we have to be living like a preventative lifestyle, in order to even begin to contemplate some of these thoughts. I think that you have to have like a healthy relationship, you have to love yourself, you have to have a healthy relationship with your body, you have to have a healthy relationship with your nutrition, you have to have a healthy relationship with your psychological energy, you have to have all these things before you can even think big. Because if you are, it's garbage in, garbage out. And if you're living a life where all you're taking in is really, really lack of nutrition within your diet, lack of nutrition within your intellectual intake, you know, if you're just a zombie watching TV all day, you're not going to prime yourself for being able to get outside of your zombiness. Like it's almost like a Walking Dead and being in your informational bubble. But like once you kind of like decouple yourself from some of the societal norms, you know, eating healthier. I do yoga. I try to do meditative practices, but I still haven't really figured all that out. But yoga is a form of my meditation, and eating better, and you know, eating better and I feel like I needed to do all that for years before I got to the point where my brain was even capable of like making bigger thoughts. I was a sugar addict for a really long time. I didn't know. I had no idea. And I think about how much energy is going on in the background. Like if you think about your brain as a computer and like the random access energy that's happening, all the processes that are happening in the back of your brain, when you're caught up in stuff, like if you like cigarette smoking. Cigarette smoking is I don't smoke cigarettes. I'm pro smoking, but not cigarette smoke. I think cigarettes are pretty bad for you. But like cigarettes, what they do is they create this timer in your brain where you can't not be thinking about it. And you think about how much energy is going to that one thing. And that's any addictive practice, whether it's chewing bubble gum. Sometimes you can't like do anything without chewing gum, or sugar or coffee or, you know, tea, caffeine, or drugs in any way, you know, like there's a lot of things there's a lot of addictive processes that we put into our brain that we can't turn off. And there is a whole BTU, there's a whole like hard drive in our brain that's being dedicated to this practice that's not serving us in any way, and it's just kind of like driving us to continue to do these things.
Actually, I have to challenge that. So I think there's a reason, and actually this connects. Everything connects, right? So this connects to the deception, and I think that the way that our culture has projected addiction is actually another deception.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think a better word for addiction is actually bonding. See, we naturally bond to each other. And because we've alienated ourselves with drugs and with alcohol.
Maybe it's self-medication. Yeah, negative self-medication over addictive behavior. Because addictions, you're right, can serve you.
Especially if you're addicted to like good people, like being around good people. Or
good
like,
vibes. I'm addicted to good vibes now.
Wholesome things, you know?
Yeah, true. You're right. I'm glad you redirected my thinking on that, because I was kind of falling into a trope about what addiction is. And I used cigarette smoking as an example, but what's interesting is nicotine's not bad for you. Nicotine's actually really healthy, really good in small doses for the human body. It's actually been shown to like really cognitively be good for you too, and it doesn't But the delivery system, cigarettes, the actual, like, I think they take things that are good for us and then they bastardize it through the delivery systems, because like the cancer agent, like the cigarette itself, the stick itself is like what causes all the trauma to the body. But actually, but nicotine is like, if you just, yeah. So it's interesting. You learn anything every day. But yeah, I didn't know that either, because I was never a cigarette smoker, but I didn't realize that nicotine was actually good for the human body. But again, it's one of those things that they take and they bait and switch and they invert and make you believe one thing and not the other. And but yeah, the addiction, I think I just used that because of I noticed it big when I stopped eating sugar, when I stopped, like, when I cut out just like added sugars, I guess. My whole psyche changed. I had a weird, noticeable, extraordinary shift in like the way that I felt throughout the day. I had like all this, I wasn't burdened any I didn't even realize that I was burdened. I had no idea. I had no idea that I was like thinking about sugar all day. Like, ooh, when am I get my, you know, mocha, whatever coffee. And then after that, I need to get a little snack. And after that, ooh, what's going to be my next snack? And do that, you know, and I was thinking about these things all day. And it had nothing to do with real hunger or real satiation or anything like that. It was just like a weird, you know, an addiction that I had no idea, because it was normalized. And I worked in an office. Yeah,
you were bonding with food because you were.
I was lacking in my life, and I was bonding with food, and I didn't even know. I didn't even know. It was unconscious. And you're right. I think a lot of our behaviors absolutely are a form of like trying to fill some sort of emotional thing that's not met, like an emotional need, like the bonding instead of having like really positive bonding experiences like with other people, we don't know how to do that. We're, you know, I didn't, you know, living without being awake, I was kind of like an asleep person. I didn't know how to really bond with people because I didn't even know who I was. And so how do you bond with someone if you don't even know who you are? And I didn't have real thoughts of my own. I just had opinions on things that I learned in school, and all that's nonsense. And so it really wasn't until I woke up that I was able to, like, I think, connect to people in a much more meaningful way, in a real, like, collaborative, like generative way, like building up instead of just like talking about, you know, people or things or materialistic endeavors that have nothing to do with furthering our thoughts. I think that we can really
Kardashians.
Keeping up with the Kardashians. Yeah, absolutely. And when we think about the types of media that are like really popularized, it's all that. It's all these reality shows, which is such an interesting way to put it. Because I don't think it represents reality at all. I think it's like the opposite of reality. But yet even the name reality show,
all deception.
Yeah, the inversion. And the inversion goes to the polarity, you know, the whirling, swirling, the polarity, the opposites create energy. And I think that that's one thing I'm kind of all over the place on this episode. This is probably not one of my greatest explainers. But the one thing that I didn't really touch on with the colors was the polarity of red and blue. You know, the opposites. That's what creates the energy, and that's what creates the energy with the magnetism. That's what creates the energy with the colors. It's because they're opposite, and because that's with everything. We think about politics; they're opposite sides. One's on this side, one's on the other, and they
hear like politics described as polarized, right?
Polarizing, yeah, exactly. And you know, yeah, it's so interesting. And you know, when you think about politics too, all the words are connected to energy. Like voting sounds like voltage. Election sounds like electron. You know, I don't think that is an accident. I think that I know that you know how important spelling and words and wordplay and the root of words and conceptualizing groups of words, like with money and the whole world and language around money, connecting to the whole world and language around water, I think is extraordinarily interesting. And there's a huge connection there. And if you've never looked into that, I think that's like we could have a whole show just on the connections of water and money, currency.
Yeah. As I was preparing for this show and looking more into like color psychology, I learned that purple is a water color.
Interesting. Tell me about that.
Element is water.
Hmm. You know, and sometimes the ocean looks at that deep, deep, deep blue, you know, that's almost like a violet.
Blue, purple, violet.
All of those are on the water sign, on the water.
All of like, I guess the darker end of that line of purple, of the lines of purple would be.
Oh, and from violet into purple. Interesting. Yeah, it makes sense. You know, these elemental colors, they really do represent, you know, like the reds, I'm sure that those represent the fire. And yeah.
Water is considered like the most magical, right? It's like, it's life.
Living. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's living. It's pretty incredible. We still don't really understand water. What I think is really interesting is how the water molecule, the H2O molecule, actually looks like Mickey Mouse. With, you know, if you look at representations of the water molecule, kind of makes me think of all of this is just, you know, cartoons. But yeah, I think that these symbols.
You ever heard that water has memory?
Yeah, and I believe it. I believe it because I do believe that water is living. Yeah.
Experiment, you know, if you believe in the scientific method. I don't believe in science, but I believe in the scientific method. That's another word magic that they pull.
Yeah, me too. I believe in provable, measurable scientific endeavors and testable observational. And I know that water is one of them. With I know that, like, if you speak into certain waters and then freeze it, if you put certain energy into water and you freeze that water, and then you put other energy, like if you yell at water over here and you talk sweetly to water over here and then you freeze it, the crystallines actually form differently. And
yep, exactly.
Yeah, I think that's, and the same thing goes for plants. You know, if you treat plants with your energy in a very specific way, not well, and then on the other side of the room, if you have a plant that you yell at but still water, you know, they're gonna have a different response. And it makes me, you know, it makes me, I never considered our energy when I was growing up. That's one thing that is as you know, as contradictory thought, and as much as I like to think outside the box, I never thought about human energy until I wasn't well into my adulthood. I never considered how important we are as energetic beings.
Human vibration.
Never really impressed me. Human vibration. That's all. That's what it is. That's what it all comes down to. Everything is vibration. Everything is frequency. We are a sum total. We as humans, everything within our body is vibrating at a specific frequency. Our heartbeat has a very specific frequency and vibration. It's different than the wavelengths that are happening in our around our neurons in our brain. They're kind of going, sometimes they're firing really quickly. Our blood's pumping. It's not always at the same rate as our heartbeat, depending on where it is in our body. Like our liver's processing stuff at a very specific rate. It's different. You know, we have all of these faculties and frequencies happening on a physical level, and then energetically, emotionally, we've got a whole other subset of energies happening. You know, when you're down, when you're depressed, you feel a very specific heaviness, lowness. It's almost like you're being pulled down, a weightiness emotionally. When you're happy, you feel like a lightness. You really feel like a light on your feet, almost like you could just lift off the ground. And so there's all these separate energies that are happening physically and emotionally in our body. And then that's just us. That's just one person. And I've got a million different energies going on, and there's a sum total for me. And I've got my personal vibe. And then across you've got your own vibe. And then over here, so they've got their vibe and they've got their vibe. And together, as the human experience, we all have like a total human vibration that is measurable and that is so powerful. And that is, if we realize how powerful we all are together, like we are the most powerful experience on the planet. Our shared physical and spiritual and conscious experience right here in this realm is like the most energy, the most spectacular. But yet we're all just kind of like living, you know, like, oh, you know, I don't matter. So many people think that they don't matter on an individual level, but like I think we all just need to realize how mighty we are. We are super, super mighty individually, energetic beings, and then together we're just like a fucking force, you know, a real force of nature. And we are the many, and our elite foes, you know, they are the few. And I think the last thing that they want us to know is how powerful and incredibly connected we are, and how energetically positive we could shift this whole experience if we just banded together I believe that. I know that you talk about shifting into a new way of living, and I think that is 100% where we need to go is a march away from these false systems that have been in place for a really long time. But just because they have been established and just because they have been existing and proven over time to be in place and strong does not mean they're valid, and does not mean they serve us. And I think that, you know, the biggest gift that we could give to the next generation is the ability to walk away from everything that's ever existed. All the things that have previously been valid, instead of being like, oh, you need to walk on the back of your forefathers, or you need to, you know, walk in the footsteps of people, you need to walk in the same path that has been created for you. I think the best gift we could ever give is say, I've erased every footstep that ever existed, and you need to head in the direction that you feel is right. You know,
do you think no history at all?
I wonder, because I think I wonder about that. I wonder what we could achieve if we never taught our children about slavery, if we never taught our children about the wrongs and the cruelties of the human experience. I think if we just started fresh and started with love only, positivity only, I think we should even get rid of the language. I don't know how we're going to do it, but I think that we need to get rid of our spoken language. I mean, I'm talking big stuff. I'm talking, because our language is all about deception. But I do believe at the base of human experience, we could communicate telepathically if we like, I think kids can do it. I think kids can. I think that's why kids have imaginary friends. I think it does exist within us, but we beat it out through language, because language is an operating system. Language is just an OSU install. We install our language. And if we didn't override our what we're born with, I think that some pretty incredible things could happen. But that's just not how society works. Like there's no way to avoid learning the language as a child. You just have to, unless you were born in the woods or born in a white room with no windows, and that seems pretty strange. But
a couple of things. I agree with you that we could be telepathic. We could get rid of language and form another way of communicating.
Just vibes. I think it could be human vibrations. I really think that that's a way we could communicate.
I agree with that point. The other point, though, of deleting history, I think even if we're operating at a level of being able to communicate, like literally just vibing and literally be able to like have a detailed conversation with just our vibes. Like I still think that we need, it doesn't even have to be a history. Like we should just
ways of living. It could be your four tenets, the four agreements. What are they called? The four agreements. You know, I think that's something even I think that you can have a philosophy without a history. Does that make sense? I think that you can have a way of living without a.
No, certainly.
Yeah.
And I don't want to I think I have a very yin yang attitude toward history as well. Like I totally feel where you're coming from, but I also feel like, so it's like this, the hippies, right? They saw that the story that we were living in was destructive, and they attempted to break out of that. But I feel like part of the reason that they failed was they did not have another story to live by.
Oh yeah. Our stories are so important. They're structural.
Like when you
were
talking about language as an operating system, like I think language and history are so interconnected and interrelated, like because of time itself, because of the nature of time. Like how am I even able to communicate these words to you without the space of the time of me, you know, the different, you understand what I'm getting at?
And over thousands of years is how we distilled this language. So yeah, you're right. And this language that we're experiencing now is not something that it's been from millions. So yeah, it has to grow and has to develop. I think it's inevitable.
We're living in a story. We can't avoid living in a story. We just need to learn a new way to write the story. And I don't think that throwing history away, I used to kind of feel you, but I don't know anymore if that's the answer. I feel like maybe don't necessarily like hold on to it.
If we didn't have deception in history, that would be beautiful.
Exactly. That's the key. Yeah. That's the key. I'm with you there, because lies are like a virus, right? So if we can take the virus out of the program that is currently understood as history, right?
Yeah.
If we can take the viruses out of that program, then it can be effective, an effective
Ooh, that's a good way to, the
allow
virus
us
is out of the
to write our
program.
story moving forward in the present moment.
Yeah, that's a really good way to look at it. I like the way that you said that, the virus is in the program. You're right, because it's not necessarily like the program is human beings operate on a structure story, and then we're good. We need that in place. You're right. But the virus in the program is instilling deception into, and so it doesn't necessarily mean that programs themselves are inherently bad. It means that they're just susceptible to viruses.
Exactly right.
Where's Bill Gates when we need him? No, I'm just kidding. He's he's not. He's the virus for antivirus protection in the program. I mean, wasn't that what? Like, isn't that funny? Like he's like our virus guy, but yet I think that's the most irony thing is he's the virus guy. Bill Gates. We think that he's going to save us with these vaccines, but he had like the software system that was like the most susceptible to viruses over a lifetime. Like Windows system was always known for getting virus put into it, and always had to have like that McAfee virus software, and that the McAfee guy is now embroiled in all this conspiracy.
Right. As far as the COVID thing goes, like I just tell people, like at this point, I have my position on it, and there's a book if you want my position on it. There's a book called COVID Operation: What Happened, Why It Happened, and What's Next by Pamela Popper and Shane Pryor. And they literally provide sources after every single chapter because they know how people are. You know, like, where's your source? Where's your source?
Of course.
Nobody has the balls to use their intuition or the guts to use their intuition anymore. And it's like, anyway, so they provide sources after every single chapter. So anyways, my whole thing on that is like, obviously I need to be a little nuanced. It's not a complete hoax. There is a contagion, but it's like literally insignificantly more dangerous than the flu.
Right. I think that there could be something spreading, but I don't think it's different than
we could talk about that for hours. And I'm just at the point now where it's like anybody who wants to take the vaccine, like all I do is promote informed choice. Like I'm not even anti-vax or pro-vax. I'm just like, I'm personally not getting it, and I lean
I'm not going to
personally, but it's just like inform yourself. Like that, it's not even in this vaccine shouldn't even be called a vaccine because it's not. They're injecting synthetic stuff into you. That's not even like dead forms or a weakened form of the virus. This is like
there's a lot of craziness around the story.
Moderna literally calls it an operating system on their website.
Wow. And that goes into the exact conversation that we're having about our bodies and our minds basically being these computers ready to be written, you know, and our experiences can change our DNA and what we put into our body. You know, we're born with, we kind of understand our DNA is like solid and never changing, but DNA can be manipulated through outside and over a lifetime, we can take in things. Even sound waves can manipulate our DNA, you know, so they say.
Right, exactly. And is that just another something to get us to believe?
Probably to get us another loose trap.
Our own power.
I think you're right. You're right. I think that there's so many stories that just serve to make us feel that we are being harmed, or we are at risk of being harmed, or it's inevitable that we will be harmed. And not only will we be harmed, but we can be taken over in these incredible ways, and we're totally powerless. And I think at the root of all these stories is like our powerlessness.
Something that you mentioned earlier that I have to comment on is you were talking about how conspiracy can get a little dark. And that is my issue with conspiracy, because I am all about love. Like I think that is the solution. We need to bring love to everything. The thing I like about conspiracy is that it's open-minded.
Me too. Yeah. And I think that's why I always gravitated towards conspiracies. I still like conspiracies. I just have a different approach to them now. I think I'm still in the conspiracy world for sure, but I view all of my conspiracies through a different lens at the moment, through this very specific lens that I have and that I share on my Twitter. But yeah, they can be, you mentioned the love, and I think conspiracies, they can really make us feel extraordinarily negative emotions towards people that we will never meet. And they can make us divided from people that are in our lives. And so that's kind of interesting. And you know, in 2019, let's say like Thanksgiving 2019, I remember looking around at my family and going, gosh, you know, look, everyone's just here eating Thanksgiving, and there's babies being murdered on Epstein Island right now. And I'm so helpless, but I just have to sit here in reality and take it, you know, and nobody is the wiser, nobody wants to know, and everyone's so asleep.
Yeah.
Fast forward, and that was horrible. That was a horrible experience for me. I felt very isolated, alienated in that. And I felt like I was crusading for truth. Nobody around me could see it. And then fast forward a year later, I had a complete 180 revelation about everything that I saw in the conspiracy realm. And I just saw it from a different angle. And it doesn't invalidate that these conspiracies exist. It just changes the way that I think the conspiracy can be viewed. And I think that they're just much different than how I saw them before, because I don't see these boogeymen as existing in the same way that I did previously. And so, but still now I'm kind of at an existential crisis as well. Now I'm sitting around looking at my family going, like everything on TV, like none of this is real. Like all these things that we are talking about right now with politics and getting ready for the election and all these things, like none of this is real. And it's a little bit different than thinking like babies are being murdered, but it's no less alienating, I would say, you know, to still feel like have a different truth than everybody else around you and that they just can't see. And then conspiracies do that.